What happens when a police officer, fueled by suspicion and a lifetime of unchecked bias, pulls over the wrong car on the wrong day? What happens when the man he throws against the hood in handcuffs isn't a suspect, but the most powerful man in the entire city? This isn't just a story of a mistaken arrest. It's a story about the chilling snap of cold steel on wrists, the deafening silence after a single sentence shatters a career, and the brutal, unforgiving karma that follows. Prepare yourself for a journey into a real-life drama where power, prejudice, and justice collide on a sun-baked street, leaving no one unchanged. The asphalt of Oakmont's 17th Street shimmered under the oppressive August sun. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of lazy, humid day that made tempers short and patience a scarce commodity. For Officer Katie Harris, it was prime time. He cruised in his patrol car, a Ford Police Interceptor, with the air conditioning blasting a frigid gale that did little to cool the simmering resentment in his gut. Harris was a cop's cop, or so he told himself. Third generation. His grandfather had walked a beat in Chicago. His father had been a detective in this very city, Oakmont. He'd grown up on stories of valor and grit, of a clear line drawn in the sand between the law-abiding and the lawbreakers. But the world had changed. The line had blurred, and in Harris's mind, it was because of people who didn't respect it, who pushed and prodded and questioned. The 17th Street corridor was a perfect example. 10 years ago, it was a forgotten stretch of boarded-up storefronts and low-income housing. Now it was Sycamore Heights, a gentrifying battleground of artisanal coffee shops and minimalist condos sprouting up beside weathered brick tenements. For Harris, the change just meant new problems. The old residents distrusted him, and the new ones called the police if a neighbor's music was too loud. His eyes, narrow and perpetually scanning, were his primary tool. He wasn't looking for active crimes so much as anomalies, things that didn't fit the picture he held in his head. A kid in a hoodie that was too nice for the area, a car that was too new. It was a gut feeling, he'd always say, a cop's instinct. That's when he saw it, a gleaming black Lincoln Navigator, impossibly clean, with tinted windows that seemed to drink the sunlight. It was parked legally in front of the construction site for the new community youth center. But to Harris, it screamed out of place. It was too much car for this neighborhood, too much money. Behind the wheel, a man was on his phone. He was black, dressed in a sharply tailored gray suit, no tie. He had a strong jaw, short cropped hair, and an air of calm authority. Harris watched him for a full minute. The man finished his call, tucked his phone away, and simply sat, looking at the half-finished structure of the youth center. Harris's partner, a younger, more by-the-book officer named Ben Chen, glanced over. "What's up, Katie?" "Check out the Lincoln," Harris grunted, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. 10-1, he's waiting for a drop. This is how they do it. Roll into a quiet street in a fancy ride to look legitimate, then the deal goes down. Chen squinted. "He's just sitting there. He's not bothering anyone." "Not yet," Harris retorted. The word "yet" was a cornerstone of his policing philosophy. Preemption. Stop the crime before it happens. You don't get a rig like that without cutting corners or selling product. Run the plate. Chen dutifully typed the license plate into his console. A few seconds passed. "Comes back clean, registered to the city of Oakmont. It's a municipal vehicle." This should have been the end of it. A city vehicle. It could be a department head, an engineer, a city planner. But Harris's instinct, now intertwined with stubborn pride, wouldn't let go. A city car? It only deepened his suspicion. A city employee using a taxpayer-funded luxury SUV to run a side hustle? It was a better story, a juicier bust. A city car, Harris sneered softly, a predator convincing himself of the hunt. Even better. Let's go have a chat, see what important city business he's conducting. He flicked on the light bar. The silent, strobing dance of red and blue lights splashed against the Navigator's tinted windows. The man inside didn't startle. He simply placed his hands on the steering wheel, visible and calm, and waited. For Officer Katie Harris, the trap was set. He was sure he had his prey. He had no idea he was the one who had just walked into it. He swung his door open, the humid air hitting him like a physical blow, and stepped out onto the hot, shimmering pavement. a man about to obliterate his own future. The man in the Lincoln lowered his window with a soft, electronic whir. The conditioned air from inside the car wafted out, a stark contrast to the oppressive heat of the street. Daniel Kingston watched the officer approach in his rearview mirror. He'd seen that walk 1,000 times. The slight swagger, the hand hovering near the firearm, the deliberate, almost theatrical stride designed to project absolute control. He felt a familiar weariness settle in his bones, a profound disappointment that felt older than he was. "Good afternoon, officer," Daniel said, his voice even and calm. He kept his hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. He knew the script. He'd taught it to his own son. Officer Harris stopped just behind the driver's side door, forcing Daniel to crane his neck to see him. A classic power move. License and registration. It wasn't a request. It was a barked command. "Of course," Daniel said. "May I ask why I'm being stopped? I believe I was legally parked." Harris's eyes narrowed. The man's composure irritated him. He was used to nervousness, stammering, or belligerence. This calm confidence felt like a challenge. "I'll be the one asking the questions. License and registration, now." "Officer," Daniel said, his tone still level but now edged with a lawyerly precision, "I am not legally required to provide you with my identification unless you have reasonable suspicion that I have committed, am committing, or am about to commit a crime. Being parked in a municipal vehicle while black is not a crime. So I will ask again, respectfully, what is the reason for this stop?" The blood rushed to Harris's face. This was exactly what he hated. The lawyer speak, the questioning of his authority. In his world, compliance was demanded, not negotiated. "Reasonable suspicion?" Harris scoffed, leaning down, his face uncomfortably close to the open window. "My suspicion is that you're in a neighborhood where you don't belong, in a vehicle that doesn't fit, probably waiting to sell poison to this community." From the patrol car, Officer Chen was shifting uneasily. This was escalating fast. He could hear the clipped, aggressive tone in his partner's voice. This wasn't a stop. It was a confrontation. Daniel Kingston took a slow, deliberate breath. He could feel the anger, cold and sharp, rising within him, but he mastered it. Showing anger was a death sentence in these situations. "Officer, you are making a series of incorrect and frankly offensive assumptions. This vehicle is registered to the city because I work for the city, and I belong in this neighborhood as much as any other citizen. In fact, I'm here to review the progress on the youth center." He gestured towards the construction site. "It's a project I personally championed." Harris let out a short, derisive laugh. "You championed it? Sure, buddy. And I'm the Queen of England. I've had enough of this." "Step out of the car." "I will not," Daniel stated firmly. "You have no legal basis to order me out of this vehicle." That was it. The final line had been crossed for Harris. The public defiance, the refusal to bend to his will, his training, his experience, everything twisted into a single, ugly impulse. "That's it. You're obstructing an investigation," Harris snarled, his hand now on the grip of his service weapon. He reached for the door handle. "Get out of the car now or I will remove you." "Katie, maybe we should just..." Chen started to say over the radio, but Harris ignored him. Daniel Kingston knew he had a choice. He could continue to assert his rights, a path that was righteous but, in this moment, physically dangerous. Or he could submit to the illegal demand of an officer who had clearly lost control. He made the calculation and decided, with a heavy heart, to comply for his own safety. He raised his hand slowly. "All right, officer. There's no need for this to escalate. I am stepping out of the vehicle." As he opened the door and stood up, his 6'2" frame unfolding from the SUV, Harris seemed to take his size as a further threat. Before Daniel could say another word, Harris grabbed his arm, spun him around, and slammed him against the side of the hot Lincoln. The impact knocked the wind out of him. The metal was scorching hot against his cheek. Harris twisted his arm brutally behind his back. "You wanted to do this the hard way," Harris grunted, breathing heavily with adrenaline and exertion. "You think you're smart? You think you're above the law?" Daniel's mind was a whirlwind of fury and disbelief. Decades of work, of fighting for a better, more just city, and here he was, being treated like a common criminal on a street he was trying to save. He felt the cold, metallic bite of handcuffs closing around his right wrist. "Officer," Daniel said, his voice strained with pain and indignation, "you are making the biggest mistake of your career?" Yeah, Harris spat, yanking the second cuff tight, the metal digging into Daniel's skin. "I've heard that one before. You have the right to remain silent." He began to recite the Miranda rights, the words a bitter, ironic mockery in the thick, humid air. Officer Chen was now out of the car, his expression a mask of horror and panic. He saw the tailored suit, the expensive shoes, the man's dignified, unbowed posture, even as he was being manhandled. This was all wrong, terribly, catastrophically wrong. With Daniel Kingston's hands cuffed tightly behind his back, Officer Harris felt a surge of triumphant vindication. He had faced down a challenge to his authority and won. He had taken a smart mouth, as he would later describe it, and put him in his place. He pushed Daniel towards the back of the Navigator, preparing to search him. "Empty your pockets onto the hood," Harris commanded. Daniel remained silent, his jaw tight. The humiliation was a physical thing, a burning fire in his chest. He could feel the eyes of construction workers who had paused their labor, watching the scene unfold. A woman across the street was filming on her phone. He knew this moment would live on, regardless of the outcome. "I said, empty your—" Harris began again, but was cut off by Officer Chen, who had finally jogged over, his face pale. "Katie, hold on," Chen said, his voice low and urgent. "Just take a second. Look at him. We need to be sure about this." "I am sure," Harris snapped, not looking at his partner. He was focused on his captive. "This guy fits the profile. Resisting, obstructing. It's a good collar." "What profile is that, Officer Harris?" Daniel Kingston asked, his voice dangerously quiet. He turned his head slowly, his eyes locking with Harris's. The contempt and pity in his gaze were more potent than any shout. "The educated black man in a nice car profile?" "The acting like a criminal profile," Harris shot back, his confidence beginning to fray under the man's unshakable composure. "Now what's in your pockets? Let's start with your wallet." "ID." "My wallet is in my right jacket pocket," Daniel said. "You're welcome to retrieve it." Harris, with a flourish of unnecessary roughness, reached into the pocket of the expensive suit jacket and pulled out a fine black leather wallet. He flipped it open, expecting to find a driver's license that would confirm his suspicions. Maybe a different name, an out-of-state plate, something that didn't add up. He pulled out the plastic card from its sleeve, and then he froze. The entire world seemed to slow down. The distant sounds of traffic, the buzz of the construction site, the humid air itself, it all faded into a dull, roaring silence in his ears. His eyes were glued to the card in his hand. It wasn't a driver's license. It was a city-issued identification card. On it was the official seal of the city of Oakmont, and under the photo of the man he had just slammed against a car, the man currently in his handcuffs, were the words, "Daniel Kingston, Mayor, City of Oakmont." Harris's mind simply refused to process it. He read it again, and a third time. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but the title was impossible. It was a joke, a fake ID. It had to be. But it wasn't a cheap fake. It looked official, too official. His throat went dry. A cold sweat, entirely different from the sweat of the afternoon heat, broke out on his forehead and trickled down his temples. His triumphant smirk had vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of pure, unadulterated panic. This is a joke," he stammered, the words barely a whisper. Daniel Kingston said nothing. He simply held Harris's terrified gaze. Chen, seeing the look on his partner's face, stepped closer. "Katie, what is it?" He looked over Harris's shoulder at the ID. His own blood ran cold. "Oh my God," Chen breathed out. "Oh my God, Katie." The ground had vanished from beneath Katie Harris's feet. He was in free fall. The man in his custody wasn't a drug dealer. He wasn't a smart-mouthed civilian. He was the chief executive of the entire municipality. He was, in the chain of command, Harris's ultimate boss. The man who appointed the police commissioner, who approved the department's budget, who held the fate of every city employee in his hands. Harris's hands began to shake uncontrollably. The wallet slipped from his numb fingers, and clattered onto the asphalt. He looked from the ID on the ground to the calm, resolute face of Mayor Daniel Kingston, and then at the steel handcuffs digging into the mayor's wrists. He had not just made a mistake. He had committed career suicide in the most spectacular and public way imaginable. Mayor? The word was a choked, pathetic sound. Take the cuffs off me, now, Mayor Kingston commanded. Each word was a block of ice delivered without heat but with the crushing weight of absolute authority. Harris fumbled for the handcuff key on his belt. His usually deft fingers were clumsy, useless. The key clinked against the cuffs as he tried to find the lock. He couldn't get it in. His vision was blurring at the edges. "Ben, do it," he croaked at his partner, his voice cracking. Officer Chen, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else on earth, quickly stepped forward. With trembling hands, he unlocked the handcuffs. The click of the mechanism releasing was the loudest sound Harris had ever heard. As the steel fell away from his wrists, Mayor Kingston brought his hands in front of him, rubbing the raw, red marks the cuffs had left behind. He never broke eye contact with the now crumpling Officer Harris. "Officer Harris," the mayor said, his voice still low but now resonating with the full power of his office. "You and I are going to have a conversation, but first, you will hand your badge and service weapon to your partner. You are relieved of duty, effective immediately." The 10 minutes that followed felt like an eternity. Mayor Kingston used his own phone to make 2 calls. The first was to his chief of staff, briefing her in clipped, precise terms. The second was a direct call to Police Chief Michael Donovan. The mayor's end of the conversation was chillingly brief. "Mike," he said, his voice a blade of cold steel, "I am on Sycamore Avenue. I have just been wrongfully arrested and assaulted by one of your officers, badge number 714, Officer Katie Harris. I want you here in 10 minutes, and I want the head of internal affairs with you. Do you understand?" There was a pause. The mayor listened, his face impassive. "No, Mike. You don't get to explain anything right now. 10 minutes. He hung up. Officer Harris was a statue of dread. He had complied with the mayor's order, handing his Glock and his badge to a bewildered Officer Chen. He was now effectively a civilian, standing on a public street, stripped of every symbol of his power. He looked hollowed out, the swagger and aggression completely drained from him, leaving behind a pale, shaking man. The woman across the street was still filming. He knew, with a sickening certainty, that his ruin was already being uploaded to the cloud. Chief Donovan, a veteran with a politician's understanding of disaster, made it in 8 minutes. 2 black sedans screamed to a halt, lights flashing. Donovan, a burly man with a face like a clenched fist, got out of the first car. He looked at the scene, the mayor rubbing his wrists, Officer Harris standing disarmed, and Officer Chen looking like a ghost. And his face went ashen. He knew this was a city-altering event. "Mr. Mayor," Donovan began, his voice rough with anxiety. I am so sorry. I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything yet, Chief," Mayor Kingston replied, cutting him off. "First, I want a formal statement from Officer Harris. Then I want Officer Chen's statement, separately. Your head of internal affairs can handle that. Now." The gears of the police department's damage control machine began to grind, but it was too late. The story was already loose. The woman's cell phone video, shaky but damning, was spreading through social media like wildfire. By the time Chief Donovan had escorted a nearly catatonic Harris into the back of a sedan, every news outlet in Oakmont had the story. The headline wrote itself: "Cop arrests mayor in apparent racial profiling incident." Back in the mayor's office an hour later, Daniel Kingston finally allowed the mask of composure to slip. He sat behind his large mahogany desk, his wife, Dr. Anya Sharma, a renowned surgeon, dabbing his wrists with an antiseptic wipe. "I'm fine, Anya," he said, though his voice was heavy with exhaustion. "You're not fine, Daniel," she countered, her touch gentle but her eyes blazing with a fierce anger he knew well. "This isn't just a scratch. This is an insult. To you, to this city, to every person who looks like you and has to live in fear of a man with a badge and a bad attitude. What are you going to do?" It was the question of the hour. His phone was vibrating nonstop with calls from city council members, community leaders, and the governor. The wolves were circling. Some smelled blood and weakness. Others smelled an opportunity for change. The old Daniel, he said, looking at his hands, the civil rights attorney, would want to sue the department into the ground. Burn it all down. And the new Daniel? Anya asked softly. The mayor, he sighed, knows this isn't just about Katie Harris. He's not the disease. He's a symptom of a sickness in that department that I have been trying to cure since I took this office. Firing him is easy. Firing him is necessary, but it's not enough. He stood up and walked to the large window overlooking the city square. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows. Harris's career is over. That's a given. The body cam footage will seal his fate. But if I make this just about punishing him, then nothing changes. Another Katie Harris will pop up next week, and the week after that. The system that created him, that trained him, that told him his instinct was more important than the Constitution, that's what has to be broken. A new resolve hardened his features. This wasn't a personal injury anymore. It was a public mandate. He had been given a gift in a way, a painful, humiliating gift. He now had the undeniable moral authority and the political capital to force through the sweeping, radical police reforms he had always dreamed of. The press conference was scheduled for 9 a.m. the next morning. Mayor Kingston would not just be addressing his illegal arrest. He would be declaring war on the status quo that made it possible. For Officer Katie Harris, the karma was just beginning. For the city of Oakmont, a reckoning was at hand. Katie Harris sat at his kitchen table, the silence of his suburban home more deafening than any siren. His wife, Sarah, stood by the counter, her arms crossed, her face a mixture of fury and shame. She had seen the video. Everyone had. It had been playing on a loop on every news channel for the past 18 hours. A drug dealer? That's what you thought? She asked, her voice trembling with disbelief. Katie, you saw a successful black man, and your mind, your prejudiced, pathetic mind, jumped straight to drug dealer. Do you hear yourself? Do you have any idea how you look? You don't understand, he mumbled, staring at the wood grain of the table. He was being difficult, questioning my authority. He was asking for it. Asking for it, Sarah shrieked, slamming her hand on the marble countertop. He was asserting his constitutional rights, the ones you swore an oath to protect. He knew them better than you did, obviously. He's the mayor, for God's sake. He runs the city you work for. Every word was a nail in his coffin. He had no defense. The justifications that had seemed so solid on that hot street now crumbled into dust under the harsh light of reality. His cop's instinct was just plain, ugly prejudice. His command presence was bullying. The doorbell rang, a jarring sound in the tense quiet. It was his union representative, a grizzled old cop named Frank Rizzo. Frank had a reputation for getting officers out of tight spots, but when he sat down at the table, his expression was grim. It's bad, Katie, Frank said, forgoing any pleasantries. The body cam footage it's crystal clear. Your audio is hot the whole time. The chief is under immense pressure from the mayor's office. They're not accepting a suspension. They want a termination. Termination? Harris choked out. After 15 years? For one bad stop? Frank sighed heavily. This wasn't a bad stop, Katie. This was an illegal stop, followed by an illegal detention, followed by an assault and battery on a public official. The DA's office is already making noise. They're considering criminal charges. Criminal charges? The words hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen from the room. Cops didn't get charged. They got investigated by IA, cleared, and put back on the street. That was the way it worked. They can't, Harris whispered. I'm a cop. You were a cop, Sarah corrected him, her voice dripping with ice. Now you're the poster boy for police brutality in America. She turned and left the room, the sound of her bedroom door slamming shut echoing through the house. Frank laid out the grim reality. The department would offer him a choice: resign immediately and quietly, or be fired and face a public, brutal trial. Frank's advice was to resign, to take the hit and try to disappear. But Katie Harris was a fighter. Or rather, he was stubborn. He was the son and grandson of cops. They didn't quit. They didn't surrender. "No," he said, a flicker of his old defiance returning. "No, I'm not resigning. I'll fight it. They can't do this." It was a catastrophic decision, born of pride and a profound lack of self-awareness. The next day, as predicted, Police Chief Donovan held a press conference and announced the immediate termination of Officer Katie Harris for gross misconduct in violation of civil rights. He announced that the department's complete, unedited body cam footage from both officers was being released to the public in the interest of full transparency. The release of the footage was an atomic bomb. The public could now see and hear everything. They heard Harris's sneering assumption that the navigator belonged to a drug dealer. They heard Mayor Kingston's calm, legally sound reasoning. They heard Harris's escalating aggression, his outright lies about obstruction, and his final snarled commands. They saw the violent slam against the car. They saw the moment of dawning, pathetic horror on Harris's face as he read the ID. The city exploded. Protesters gathered outside police headquarters in City Hall, but this time they were chanting the mayor's name. His ordeal had become a rallying cry. For Katie Harris, the world shrank to the four walls of his house. The legacy he had been so proud of, the name he had inherited, was now a mark of shame. His father, retired in Florida, stopped taking his calls. His wife moved into the guest room. The friends he had on the force, who would have once taken a bullet for him, were now silent, distancing themselves from the contagion of his disgrace. He was alone, watching his life burn down on live television, and the hard karma, the real grinding consequences of his actions, had only just begun to take hold. An investigator from the district attorney's office had found something in his file, a loose thread that, when pulled, would unravel his entire past. In the sleek, glass-walled office of the Oakmont district attorney, Helena Ramirez watched the sun rise, casting a pale, uncertain light over the city. For 72 hours, her life had been consumed by the case of former officer Katie Harris. The political pressure was immense. The mayor's office wanted a swift and decisive prosecution. The police union was screaming about a witch hunt. But for Ramirez, a prosecutor who had built her career on the unglamorous, methodical pursuit of justice, this was about something far deeper than a single, high-profile incident. She believed in the rotten apple theory only to a point. Rotten apples, she knew, were often the product of a rotten barrel. A cop like Katie Harris, with his level of brazen, unthinking arrogance, did not simply emerge from a vacuum. His actions against the mayor were not a first mistake. They were the first time he had made a mistake against someone powerful enough to guarantee a consequence. The real question, the one that kept her up at night, was how many others there had been. How many nobodies had been ground up by his instincts. She buzzed her chief investigator. Paul Jones entered her office a moment later, a mug of black coffee in his hand. Jones was a retired homicide detective, a man who had left the force on his own terms after growing weary of the internal politics and the blue wall of silence that protected men like Harris. His loyalty was not to the badge, but to the truth, which made him the perfect man for this job. "Paul," Ramirez began, skipping the pleasantries, "the case against Harris for the mayor's arrest is a slam dunk. A child could prosecute it with that body cam footage, but it feels incomplete. It feels too easy. I want his entire service record from the day he graduated the academy. I want every traffic stop that resulted in a search, every resisting arrest charge, and especially every single civilian complaint filed against him, no matter how trivial or how quickly it was dismissed." Jones took a slow sip of his coffee. "You think there's a pattern?" It wasn't a question. "I think a man who assaults the mayor in broad daylight has been getting away with abusing ordinary citizens in the dark for years," she stated. "His personnel file is likely sanitized. Internal Affairs has a habit of making complaints disappear. I want you to go to the physical archives, the dust and the paper. I want to find the ghosts. Find me a victim without a famous name." For the next 2 weeks, Paul Jones descended into the climate-controlled purgatory of the Oakmont Police Department's Central Records Warehouse. It was a cavernous, soulless place, filled with rows upon rows of gray metal shelving, groaning under the weight of 15-foot-high stacks of manila folders. The air was thick with the smell of decaying paper and silence. Jones began the painstaking process of pulling every file associated with badge number 714. He saw the pattern Ramirez had predicted. Harris's reports were a study in repetition, using the same tired, boilerplate phrases. Furtive movements, individual known to me from prior encounters, acted belligerent and uncooperative. It was the language of manufactured probable cause. He found nearly 24 civilian complaints, almost all from minority men, alleging everything from illegal searches to verbal abuse, and every single one ended with the same stamp. Unfounded, cleared by internal affairs. Jones was about to give up, his eyes sore from reading fine print under fluorescent lights, when he found it. Tucked away, misfiled under a different year, was a complaint from a 19-year-old named Jamal Peters. The narrative was so eerily, chillingly familiar that it made the hairs on Jones's arms stand up. 5 years ago, a quiet street, a young black man in a respectable, if not flashy, car. An officer deciding he looked out of place. An escalation, a charge of obstructing an investigation. But Harris had added a venomous twist. During a search of Jamal's car, he found a bottle of Adderall. Jamal had a legitimate prescription for his ADHD, a fact confirmed by his doctor. But Harris, in his report, claimed the quantity and the presence of small plastic bags, which Jamal used for spare car fuses, were indicative of an intent to distribute. He had slapped the 19-year-old college student with a felony charge. The felony had been a bluff, a cudgel to force a plea. It was eventually dropped, but the damage was done. Faced with the terror of a public trial and the word of a decorated officer against his, Jamal Peters pleaded guilty to the misdemeanor obstruction charge. The conviction had been a bomb detonated in the middle of his life. It had cost him his federal financial aid, forcing him to drop out of his automotive technology program. It had created a criminal record that followed him everywhere. The life he had planned was gone. His IA complaint against Harris had been dismissed in less than a week. Jones felt a cold knot of anger tighten in his stomach. This was the ghost he had been sent to find. He found Jamal Peters at a Jiffy Lube on the industrial outskirts of Oakmont. The air smelled of burnt oil and exhaust fumes. Jamal, now 24, had the weary, hollowed-out eyes of someone much older. He moved with a practiced efficiency, draining oil from a sedan, his face and hands stained with grease. When Jones identified himself, Jamal's entire body tensed. He wiped his hands on a rag, his expression hardening into a mask of deep-seated distrust. "If this is about a ticket, I already paid it," Jamal said flatly, not making eye contact. "It's not about a ticket, Mr. Peters," Jones said, his voice low and steady. "My name is Paul Jones. I'm an investigator with the district attorney's office. I'm here to talk to you about a complaint you filed 5 years ago against an officer named Katie Harris." A bitter, humorless laugh escaped Jamal's lips. He finally looked at Jones, his eyes filled with a cynicism born of profound disappointment. "Let me guess. You found it and want me to say I was mistaken so you can close it for good. He did nothing wrong, right? That's what your buddies in IA told me. Said I was lucky that was all he charged me with." "No," Jones said, holding his gaze. "That's not why I'm here. We believe you, Jamal. We believe your complaint was buried, and we believe Officer Harris lied in his official report. He perjured himself." Jamal just shook his head, turning back to his work. "Words are cheap. I heard a lot of words 5 years ago. None of them helped." "This is different," Jones pressed, stepping closer. "Katie Harris was fired last week. He's been arrested. He assaulted a man and cuffed him on the side of the road for no reason, and it was all caught on his own body camera." Jones paused, letting the weight of the next words sink in. "The man he arrested was Mayor Daniel Kingston." Jamal stopped working. He slowly turned back to Jones, his mouth slightly agape. He had seen the headlines, but he hadn't made the connection to the name from his own past. "The body cam footage," Jones continued, "shows Harris using the exact same tactics he used on you. The baseless suspicion, the immediate aggression, the escalation when his authority is questioned. It establishes a clear, undeniable pattern of malicious conduct. His lies about you can now be proven by his own actions against the mayor. Your 5-year-old nightmare is our new star exhibit." For the first time in a very long time, a flicker of something other than weary resignation sparked in Jamal Peters' eyes. It was a fragile, hesitant ember of hope. 2 days later, DA Helena Ramirez stood at a podium, facing a blinding wall of camera flashes. The media had been expecting a routine update. They were not prepared for what came next. Standing beside her was not the mayor, but a nervous, dignified young man in a borrowed suit, flanked by his parents. While the assault against our mayor was a shocking betrayal of public trust, Ramirez announced, her voice ringing with conviction, it has become clear that it was not an isolated incident, but rather the symptom of a deeper rot. Today, my office is filing new and far more serious charges against Katie Harris. We have uncovered evidence that he engaged in a pattern of fabricating evidence and falsifying police reports to secure wrongful convictions. We are charging him with felony perjury in the case of Mr. Jamal Peters. She placed a hand on Jamal's shoulder. Mr. Peters' life was unjustly altered by these actions. He is a victim of a system that chose to believe a corrupt officer over an innocent citizen. Today, that stops. Across town, in the suffocating quiet of his living room, Katie Harris watched the press conference on television. He saw Jamal Peters' face and felt a jolt of pure, nauseating panic. The past, a thing he had never given a second thought to, was suddenly alive and standing next to the district attorney. His phone rang. It was his lawyer, his voice a frantic roar. Perjury? Falsifying a report? Are you insane? The lawyer screamed. You told me the mayor's arrest was a one-off, a bad judgment call. This isn't a PR problem anymore, Katie. This is a go-to-prison problem. They have a pattern. They have a sympathetic victim. They have you on camera showing exactly the kind of cop you are. They're not just going to take your job, they're going to take your life. Harris dropped the phone. The room started to spin. The karma, the true, devastating consequence of his actions, was no longer an abstract threat. It was here. It had a name, and its name was Jamal Peters. He wasn't just facing the end of his career anymore. He was facing a cold, steel prison cell, brought about not by the powerful man he had arrested last week, but by the powerless boy he had destroyed 5 years ago. The trial of Katie Harris began not with a bang, but with the suffocating hush of a city holding its breath. The Oakmont Superior Courthouse became the epicenter of a media firestorm, with satellite trucks lining the streets and reporters from national news outlets jostling for position on the marble steps. This was no longer a local story of a cop's bad day. It had become a national referendum on policing, power, and prejudice. Inside, the courtroom was a theater of quiet tension, every seat filled, every spectator aware they were witnessing a pivotal moment in their city's history. District Attorney Helena Ramirez began her opening statement with a chilling calm. She did not raise her voice. She simply stood before the jury and laid out the facts like a surgeon arranging her instruments. This is a case about 2 arrests, she began, her eyes sweeping over the jurors. One happened in the bright light of day to the most powerful man in our city. The other happened 5 years ago in the quiet obscurity of the afternoon to a promising young student. One was recorded on video that shocked the conscience of our community. The other was recorded only in a falsified police report designed to ruin a life. The prosecution will prove that these were not 2 different acts, but the same act committed by the same man, driven by the same arrogant belief, that his badge gave him the power to be judge, jury, and executioner on the streets of our city. The defense's opening was a stark contrast, a rambling, defensive portrayal of Harris as a beleaguered hero in a dangerous world, a man forced to make split-second judgments. It was a narrative that crumbled the moment the prosecution played the first piece of evidence, the unedited body cam footage of Mayor Kingston's arrest. Projected onto a large screen, the video was devastating. The jury didn't just see the events, they experienced them. They heard the condescending, aggressive tone in Harris's voice, saw the mayor's steadfast, patient attempts to de-escalate, and witnessed the shocking moment of violence as he was slammed against his own vehicle. Gasps echoed through the gallery. Several jurors visibly recoiled. Harris, sitting at the defense table, refused to watch the screen, his face a grim, stony mask. But the emotional core of the trial arrived when Jamal Peters took the stand. Dressed in a simple dark suit, he spoke with a quiet dignity that commanded attention. He didn't seem angry or vengeful, merely sad, as he recounted the day his life was knocked from its tracks. He described his dream of opening a custom auto shop, the pride he felt being the first in his family to attend college, and the confusion and terror of being treated like a hardened criminal by Officer Harris. He looked right through me, Jamal said, his voice steady but laced with the memory of pain. It didn't matter what I said, that the car was mine, that my prescription was legal. He had already decided who I was. And when you're 19 and a man with a gun and a badge tells you who you are, part of you starts to believe him. On cross-examination, Harris's lawyer attempted to paint Jamal as a troublemaker. Weren't you being argumentative, Mr. Peters? Didn't you fail to show the proper respect to the officer? Jamal met the lawyer's gaze. I was trying to understand why I was being treated like a criminal for waiting for my sister. I believe respecting the law also means the law has to respect my rights as a citizen. That's all I was asking for. The answer, delivered with such simple, unassailable logic, visibly deflated the defense attorney. The jury saw a victim, not an instigator. The prosecution rested its case. The defense's only hope was Katie Harris himself. It was a gamble they had to take, and one that backfired spectacularly. On the stand, Harris was his own worst enemy. Under direct examination, he was stiff and recited rehearsed lines about officer safety and the totality of the circumstances. But under D.A. Ramirez's surgical cross-examination, his composure cracked, and the raw, unfiltered arrogance that had caused this entire catastrophe came pouring out. So, a black man in a luxury vehicle in what you considered a high-crime area is automatically suspicious to you, Officer Harris? Ramirez asked. My training and experience told me to be aware, Harris snapped back. And your training told you that a legally parked citizen asserting his constitutional rights was obstructing an investigation? He was being a smart mouth. He was challenging my authority. Harris's voice rose, his face flushing with anger. It was a fatal admission. He wasn't policing a crime. He was policing a perceived slight to his ego. Ramirez pressed on, bringing up the Jamal Peters case. And I suppose Mr. Peters was also challenging your authority when you charged him with a felony for his own legally prescribed medication? I believed he was a dealer, Harris spat, and the court accepted his plea, didn't they? A plea he made under the threat of a felony charge you knew was baseless, Ramirez countered, her voice like ice. You held his future hostage to close an arrest, didn't you? By the end of his testimony, Harris was a red-faced, sputtering mess of self-pity and blame. He had shown no remorse, only resentment. He hadn't just lost the jury, he had repulsed them. The closing arguments were a formality. Ramirez summarized the mountain of evidence, concluding, Katie Harris betrayed his oath, he betrayed his city, and he betrayed the very idea of justice. Not once, but time and again, it's time for accountability. The jury agreed. After deliberating for less than 4 hours, they returned with a verdict. Guilty on all counts. The words fell like hammer blows in the silent courtroom. Katie Harris's face finally went slack with shock, the reality of his ruin crashing down on him. Across the room, Jamal Peters' mother quietly wept, her tears not of sorrow, but of long overdue relief. At the sentencing hearing a month later, Mayor Daniel Kingston rose to give his victim impact statement. He barely spoke of his own arrest. Instead, he turned to face the gallery, his eyes finding Jamal and his family. The true victim of Katie Harris's abuse of power is not standing here at this podium, the mayor said, his voice filled with a powerful solemnity. The crime against me was an anomaly, an attack on an office. But the crime against Mr. Jamal Peters was the norm, an attack on a person, on a future, on a dream. It represents the thousands of silent injustices that happen in the shadows, to those without the power to fight back. The greatest harm Mr. Harris caused was not the red marks he left on my wrists, but the permanent scar he left on a young man's potential. Therefore, any sentence rendered should not be for my sake, but for his. The judge, a stern woman known for her adherence to the law, clearly agreed. Before handing down the sentence, she looked directly at Harris. You were given a sacred trust, she said, her voice laced with contempt, and you used it as a weapon against the very people you swore to protect. You are a disgrace to your uniform. She sentenced Katie Harris to a term of 4 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole for the first two. As bailiffs came forward to take him into custody, he looked like a ghost, a hollowed-out man stripped of everything he once was. 2 weeks later, on a bright, clear afternoon, Mayor Daniel Kingston stood on the steps of City Hall. The crowd was different from the one at the courthouse. It was a mix of activists, city officials, families, and ordinary citizens, their faces filled with a cautious optimism. Standing proudly beside the mayor was Jamal Peters. "Today is not about closing a dark chapter," the mayor proclaimed. "It is about writing a new one. A conviction is an end, but reform is a beginning. For too long, we have relied on the good intentions of individuals within a flawed system. Today, we begin to fix the system itself." He held up a thick portfolio. "I am signing into law the most sweeping police accountability and reform package in Oakmont's history. It mandates a complete overhaul of our use of force continuum, establishes a truly independent civilian oversight board with subpoena power, and creates a conviction integrity unit within the DA's office to review past cases of potential misconduct." He paused, then smiled at the young man beside him. "And so, it is my profound honor to announce that this legislation will forever be known as Jamal's Law." The crowd erupted into thunderous applause. Jamal Peters stepped to the microphone, no longer the weary, cynical mechanic, but a poised and powerful symbol of resilience. "This can't give me back the dream I lost 5 years ago," he said, his voice clear and strong. "But it gives me and my family a new one, a dream that one day no one in this city will have to fear the people who are meant to protect them." With that, Mayor Kingston sat down at a ceremonial desk and, using a dozen different pens for posterity, signed the bill into law. The sharp scratch of his signature was not just an end to Katie Harris's story of disgrace, but the first word in the city of Oakmont's new story of hope. The story of Katie Harris and Mayor Daniel Kingston serves as a powerful real-life reminder that accountability is not a myth. It shows us that a uniform and a badge do not place anyone above the law, and that unchecked prejudice, no matter how deeply ingrained, will eventually face a reckoning. This wasn't just about one bad cop getting what he deserved. It was about a system being forced to confront its own reflection in the mirror of a single catastrophic mistake. It's a testament to the fact that true justice isn't just about punishment. It's about rebuilding something better and more equitable from the ashes of injustice. If this story of justice and consequence resonated with you, please take a moment to hit that like button to help spread this powerful message. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel for more true life dramas that matter. Your support helps us continue to tell these important stories. Thank you for listening.